This story is fictional and does not promote criminal activity or violence. All characters and events are products of imagination. Any resemblance to real persons or organizations is coincidental. The X-ray looked like a death sentence printed on film. Michael Brennan stared at the dark mass blooming across his prostate, a shadow that had no business being there. Dr. Patel's voice became background noise, words like aggressive and metastatic, and 2 to 3 years floating past like debris in a flood. Mick heard none of it. He was thinking about his wife, Catherine, about the car bomb that had torn her apart 10 years ago in a parking garage on Hanover Street. About how he'd promised her he'd get out, go legitimate, give their boys a clean future. About how that promise had died with her in fire and twisted metal. The tumor didn't care about promises. "Mr. Brennan, are you listening?" Dr. Patel's hand touched his shoulder, gentle but insistent. "We need to discuss treatment options. Radiation, hormone therapy, possibly surgery depending on how far it's spread." Mick looked up from the X-ray, meeting the doctor's eyes. Patel was young, maybe 40, with the earnest concern of someone who still believed modern medicine could save everyone. He didn't understand that some men were already dead long before cancer found them. "How long without treatment?" Mick's voice came out steady, the same tone he used when ordering a problem handled. Calm, final. "Michael, we can't just give up. There are options." "How long?" Patel's shoulders sagged. He'd seen this before. Men who'd made peace with dying before they ever sat in his office. 6 months, maybe less, it's stage 4. The pain will be significant. 6 months. Mick did the math. Spring would turn to summer, summer to fall. He might see Christmas if he was lucky, though luck had never been his strong suit. Enough time to settle his affairs. Enough time to make sure his sons didn't destroy each other fighting over what he'd built. Enough time to face the enemy he'd exiled 15 years ago, the one who'd been circling like a wolf waiting for the alpha to weaken. Enough time to finish what he should have finished back in Kuwait, when he and Vic Calabrese had been brothers sharing a foxhole instead of enemies dividing a city. "I understand," Mick said, standing. His leg ached where the shrapnel still lived beneath the scar tissue, a souvenir from Desert Storm that had been bothering him more lately. Turned out cancer wasn't the only thing eating him from inside. "What do I owe you for today?" "Michael, please. Let's at least discuss palliative care, pain management." "Send the bill to my accountant." Mick buttoned his coat, expensive cashmere that hung a bit looser than it had 6 months ago. He'd thought the weight loss was stress. Turned out his body had been trying to tell him something. "I'll call if I need anything." The October afternoon hit him like a slap when he stepped outside. Boston in autumn, leaves turning red and gold, the kind of beautiful day that made you forget winter was coming. Mick walked 3 blocks to where Tommy Sullivan waited with the car, a black Lincoln Navigator with bulletproof glass and run-flat tires. Tommy had been with him since the beginning, consigliere and friend. The only man Mick trusted to know he'd just been handed a terminal diagnosis, without spreading it through the organization like wildfire. Tommy was 52, built like a fire hydrant, with the kind of face that had seen too much and stopped showing it years ago. He'd served in the Gulf as a Navy corpsman attached to the Marines, patching up wounded jarheads under fire while rockets screamed overhead. He'd adopted their motto, their brotherhood, their Semper Fi. When they came home, he'd stitched up Mick's shrapnel wound in a motel room because hospitals asked too many questions. "How'd it go, boss?" Tommy asked as Mick slid into the back seat. "Drive to the club. We need to talk." Tommy knew better than to ask questions when Mick used that tone. The Navigator pulled into traffic, weaving through the North End with the practiced ease of someone who'd been navigating these narrow streets for 3 decades. Past the Italian restaurants and bakeries, past the apartment buildings where 3 generations of families lived on top of each other, past the corner where Mick had gotten his first real job at 16 running numbers for his Uncle Sal. The social club occupied the ground floor of a brownstone on Salem Street. No sign outside, just a door with a buzzer and a camera that fed to Tommy's phone. Inside, the place looked like it hadn't changed since 1975. Dark wood paneling, photographs of boxers and singers nobody under 50 remembered, a bar that opened at 11 and closed when the last man left. The smell of cigar smoke and espresso was baked into the walls. 4 of Mick's captains were already there, sitting at the big table in back, playing cards and waiting for their weekly check-in. They stood when Mick entered. Polly Marchetti, 48, controlled the gambling operations. Frankie DeLuca, 51, managed collections and muscle. Bobby Rizzo, 45, handled their legitimate fronts. And Sal Benedetto, 53, ran the unions they'd infiltrated over the years. Good men, loyal men. Men who'd been getting soft, getting lazy, letting the younger crews push boundaries that never should have been tested. "Sit," Mick said, lowering himself into the chair at the head of the table. Tommy moved to his customary position at Mick's right shoulder, close enough to whisper if needed. "Numbers." Polly went first, sliding a ledger across the table. "Gambling's down 12% from last quarter. The sports books are holding steady, but the poker games are getting hit by this online stuff. Kids don't want to sit in a room when they can play from their phones." Mick studied the figures. 12% wasn't catastrophic, but it was a trend pointing the wrong direction. "What are you doing about it?" "Working on partnerships with some of the offshore sites. Taking a taste of their New England action in exchange for not making problems. Make sure the partnerships are clean. I don't want my name attached to anything that steals from regular people who can't afford it." "Understood, boss." Frankie went next. His numbers were worse. Collections were down 18%, and 3 of his crew had been arrested for assault after a beef got out of hand in Revere. "The Calabrese family's been moving in on our territory," Frankie said, and the name hung in the air like smoke. "They're offering better terms to the bookies, taking smaller cuts, trying to squeeze us out." There it was, Victor Calabrese. Mick had known it was coming. You didn't exile a man like Vic without expecting him to come back. The only question was when. "How many of our people have flipped?" Mick asked. 3 confirmed. Maybe 5 more we're not sure about. "The ones who flipped, are they moving product?" The question was quiet, dangerous. Frankie shifted in his seat. Everyone at the table knew Mick's one absolute rule. No drugs. Not cocaine, not heroin, not pills, nothing that turned human beings into empty shells chasing the next fix. He'd seen what that poison did in the Gulf, soldiers coming home hooked on whatever they could find to forget the things they'd done. He'd watched it hollow out neighborhoods, turn mothers into ghosts, turn kids into criminals before they hit puberty. The Brennan family was many things, but they weren't drug dealers. "Yeah," Frankie admitted. "The ones who went to Calabrese are pushing fentanyl through the methadone clinics, making serious money too." Mick's hand tightened on the table. "Then they're not our people anymore. Make that clear to anyone thinking about following them. You work for Calabrese, you're an enemy. There's no coming back." "Boss, if we're too hard, we'll push more of them away." "Then let them go. I'd rather have 10 loyal soldiers than 100 mercenaries." Mick looked around the table, meeting each man's eyes. "We built this organization on rules. No drugs, no civilians, no women, no kids. Those rules made us different, made us better than animals like Calabrese. The day we abandon those rules is the day we deserve to fall." The room was silent. These men had heard variations of this speech for 25 years, but it never got old. It was the bedrock they stood on, the thing that separated them from the cartels and the Russians and the gangs that treated human life like a commodity. It was also, Mick realized, going to get them killed if they didn't adapt. Bobby Rizzo cleared his throat. The construction contracts are solid. We've got 3 projects in Southie, 2 in Charlestown, 1 in Cambridge. All clean money, all union labor, all above board. That side of things is actually growing. Good. Keep growing it. In 5 years, I want the legitimate businesses to be bigger than the criminal ones. 5 years? Bobby looked confused. Mick had never talked about timelines before. You thinking about retirement, boss? I'm thinking about legacy. Mick stood, signaling the meeting was over. Any of you have sons working in the business? Polly nodded. My kid Mikey just made his bones last month. Good earner. Get him out, find him a straight job. Same goes for anyone else's kids who want to follow dad into this life. Tell them there's no future here. The world's changing. The cops have technology we can't beat. The feds have resources we can't match. The only way to survive is to evolve or die. The captains exchanged glances. This wasn't the Mick Brennan they knew. Their boss didn't talk about evolution. He talked about tradition, about honor, about the old ways that had kept them on top for a generation. You feeling okay, boss? Sal asked carefully. I'm fine, just thinking ahead. Now get out of here. I need to talk to Tommy. They filed out, still whispering among themselves. Mick waited until the door closed and locked before turning to his oldest friend. Tommy had been the one who'd saved his life in Kuwait, who'd dragged him behind cover when the mortar hit, who'd stopped the bleeding when everyone else was too busy shooting back at the Iraqis. How bad? Tommy asked. 6 months without treatment, maybe 2 years with. Tommy's face didn't change, but his hand gripped the back of a chair hard enough to make the wood creak. You gonna fight it? What's the point? Buy myself a year of feeling like hell, dying in a hospital bed instead of on my feet. Mick poured 2 fingers of bourbon, slid 1 glass to Tommy. I made Catherine a promise. I said I'd get out, go clean, make sure the boys had a real future. I broke that promise. Now I've got 6 months to keep it. The boys. Tommy drank his bourbon in 1 swallow. Sean's gonna lose his mind when you tell him. I'm not telling him, not yet. Mick moved to the window, looking out at Salem Street. Kids playing stickball in the narrow alley. Old women hanging laundry. The same scene that had played out in this neighborhood for 100 years. Sean's got ambition, too much of it. He sees me weakening, he'll make a move. Your own son wouldn't. My own son's been using cocaine for 6 months and thinks I don't know. My own son's been meeting with people I haven't authorized. My own son looks at me like I'm already dead. Mick turned back to Tommy. I love Sean. He's my blood, but he's also my biggest problem. Before Tommy could respond, the club's phone rang. Ancient rotary phone on the wall, the kind you couldn't trace, couldn't tap without physically accessing the line. Only 5 people had the number. Mick picked it up on the 3rd ring. No voice on the other end. Just the sound of a camera shutter clicking 3 times, then the dial tone. The prearranged signal. Someone had left something for him at the drop location. I need to take a ride, Mick said, hanging up. Alone. Like hell. You just told me you're dying. You're not going anywhere without backup. Tommy. Don't Tommy me. I've been watching your back for 30 years. I'm not stopping now. Mick knew better than to argue. Tommy was stubborn as a mule when he dug in. Fine, but you stay in the car. The drop location was a parking garage in the financial district, 3rd level, northeast corner, inside a maintenance closet that nobody had checked in 5 years. Mick had used it dozens of times for sensitive exchanges, information that couldn't risk electronic transmission. He made Tommy park 2 spaces away, engine running, while he walked to the closet. The package was there. Small cardboard box, unmarked, sitting on a shelf next to paint cans and mops. Mick opened it carefully, checking for wires or triggers out of habit. Inside were 3 things: A thumb drive, a stack of photographs, and a note written in block letters. Your son BTRYSYOU. Your enemy returns. Choose wisely. The photographs showed Sean in a dozen different locations over the past month. Meeting with men Mick didn't recognize. Meeting with men he did recognize, soldiers who worked for Victor Calabrese in Providence. The final photograph showed Sean and Vic sitting together at a restaurant, leaning close in conversation, looking for all the world like old friends catching up. Mick's hands shook, not from fear, from rage so pure it felt like electricity in his veins. The thumb drive contained audio. Mick didn't have a laptop with him, but he knew what would be on it. Conversations, plans, the sound of his eldest son plotting against him. He pocketed the package and walked back to the navigator, his mind already 3 steps ahead. Tommy took one look at his face and knew not to ask questions. They drove in silence back to Mick's house, a mansion in Chestnut Hill that had been worth $2 million when he bought it and was worth $10 million now. Too big for one person, too full of ghosts. Catherine's piano in the living room, untouched since she died. Sean's high school football trophies in the study. Patrick's college acceptance letters framed on the wall. 2 sons, one plotting murder, one trying to escape into legitimacy. Mick loved them both, but only one of them could he save. Sunday dinner was a tradition that predated even Mick's time running the organization. His grandmother had started it back in the 40s, mandatory family gathering every week no matter what. Wars, arrests, feuds, none of it mattered. You showed up for Sunday dinner or you explained to Nana why you disrespected the family. Mick had kept the tradition alive even after Catherine died, even though it was just him and the boys now, because some anchors were too important to cut loose. Sean arrived first, driving a BMW M5 that cost more than most people made in 2 years. He was 32, built like the Marine he'd been before coming home from Iraq with a head full of bad memories, and a Purple Heart he kept in a drawer. Handsome in that dangerous way that attracted the wrong kind of women and the right kind of trouble. He had Catherine's dark eyes and Mick's jawline, but something else too, something hungry and restless that scared Mick when he looked too close. Pop! Sean kissed Mick's cheek, the old-world gesture that meant respect even when the respect wasn't genuine. Smells good, you cooking. Maria's cooking. Maria was the housekeeper who came 3 days a week, the only person allowed in Catherine's kitchen. Your brother's not here yet. Patrick's always late, probably stopping to save a kitten from a tree or some shit. The contempt in Sean's voice was casual, practiced. He'd never forgiven Patrick for going to college, for wanting something other than the family business, for being weak in all the ways Sean defined strength. They moved to the living room. Mick poured bourbon, 2 fingers for each of them, and they sat in the leather chairs that had belonged to Mick's Uncle Sal. The old man's presence still lived in this room, in the cigar smell that wouldn't quite leave, in the worn spots on the armrests where his hands had rested for 40 years. How's business? Mick asked, watching his son over the rim of his glass. Good. The seaport protection contracts are solid. The new casino's paying on time. I've been talking to some people about expanding into Providence, maybe taking some of Calabrese's territory while he's distracted with the feds. Sean said it smooth, easy, like he wasn't testing whether his father knew. Calabrese is distracted. That's what I hear. Federal indictments coming down on his whole organization. Wire fraud, money laundering, the works. Could be an opportunity for us to move in, take over some of his operations. Mick sipped his bourbon. Who told you this? Sources. You taught me to keep my ear to the ground. I taught you loyalty comes before opportunity. Mick set down his glass. Victor Calabrese is off limits. You don't talk to him, you don't work with him, you don't take his territory even if it's sitting there empty. That clear. Something flickered across Sean's face, too quick to read. Why? You exiled him 15 years ago. He's not your friend anymore. Exactly, which means he's my enemy. And my enemy's enemy isn't my friend. He's just another snake in the grass waiting to bite. Mick leaned forward. Sean, I need you to hear this. Really hear it. Victor Calabrese will say anything, promise anything, offer anything to get what he wants. And what he wants is to destroy me. If you get in bed with him, you're signing your own death warrant. I'm not getting in bed with anyone, Pop. Jesus. I just thought if there's opportunity. There's no opportunity with snakes, just venom. The front door opened, and Patrick came in, bringing cold air and the smell of rain. He was 28, tall and lean where Sean was broad and muscular, with Catherine's smile and none of Mick's hardness. He wore a suit that probably came from Brooks Brothers, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed money. His fiancée, Claire, was with him, a kindergarten teacher from Brookline who'd somehow fallen in love with a mob boss's son and still didn't fully understand what that meant. Sorry we're late, Patrick said, kissing Mick's cheek the same way Sean had, but meaning it. Traffic on Storrow was insane. No problem. Your brother and I were just talking business. Which I don't need to hear. Patrick grabbed Claire's coat, hung it carefully. How are you feeling, Dad? You look tired. I'm fine, just busy. Mick stood, suddenly aware of how much effort it took, how his leg protested, how his bones felt heavier than they should. Let's eat before Maria kills us all. Dinner was pasta carbonara, Caesar salad, fresh bread from the bakery on Hanover. They ate at the long table in the dining room, beneath the chandelier Catherine had loved, with wine that cost more per bottle than most families spent on groceries. The conversation stayed light. Patrick talked about his investment firm, about the new office they were opening in Cambridge, about how Claire's kindergarten class had raised money for pediatric cancer research. Claire laughed at Sean's jokes, even though Mick could see she was uncomfortable, could see the way she tensed whenever Sean's voice got too loud or too sharp. Sean drank too much, his third glass of wine before the entrees were even cleared, and told stories about the old neighborhood, about guys they grew up with who were dead or in prison, about scores they'd pulled that sounded glamorous in the retelling, but had been desperate and ugly in the moment. Mick watched his sons and saw the future splitting like a cracked mirror. Sean, heading toward violence and betrayal and a shallow grave. Patrick, trying to build something clean, something good, already tainted by association with money he didn't know was dirty. I have an announcement, Mick said when dessert was finished, when the cannoli were gone and the coffee was cold. About the family business. Everyone stopped. Sean leaned forward. Patrick leaned back. I'm stepping down, Mick continued. Not tomorrow, but soon, within the year, and I'm making changes to how things are structured. What kind of changes? Sean's voice was tight. The criminal operations are going to wind down. We're keeping the protection contracts, the unions, the gambling, but everything else gets phased out over 5 years. The legitimate businesses, the construction, the real estate, the restaurants, those get expanded. Patrick, I want you running that side. Patrick's mouth opened, closed. Dad, I don't want any part of this. I know, but you're good with money, you're good with people, and you're clean, that matters. Mick turned to Sean. You'll handle the transition on the criminal side. Work with the captains, make sure everyone who needs to gets taken care of, make sure the families who depend on us don't get left hanging. It's a big job, requires discipline and patience. Transition to what? Sean asked. What happens after the transition? You decide. You want to go legitimate like your brother, I'll help you. You want to stay in the life, you do it somewhere else. Boston's done with us. The feds are too smart, the cops are too connected, the technology's too good. The old ways don't work anymore. Sean slammed his glass down hard enough to crack the stem. The old ways built everything we have. The old ways kept us on top for 30 years. And you want to just walk away, give up, Let guys like Calabrese take what's ours. What's ours was bought with blood and violence. I'm tired of blood, Sean. I'm tired of funerals. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder. I want my sons to have lives that don't end in prison or in the ground. Then you shouldn't have raised us in this world. Sean stood, swaying slightly. You can't spend 30 years teaching us to be wolves and then get mad when we don't want to be sheep. I'm not asking you to be a sheep. I'm asking you to be smart. Smart is taking what's ours before someone else does. Smart is hitting Calabrese while he's weak, taking Providence, expanding into New Hampshire. Smart is building an empire, not dismantling one. Sean's voice rose, the cocaine edge showing through the alcohol. You've gone soft, old man. Mom dying broke something in you, and now you want to burn down everything you built because you're too scared to fight anymore. The room went silent. Claire's face had gone pale. Patrick looked like he wanted to disappear. Mick stood slowly, every year of his 56 pressing down like stones. Get out of my house, Mick said quietly. What? You disrespect your mother's memory in the house she died, protecting you and your brother. You don't get to stay. Get out. Sean laughed, bitter and sharp. Yeah, well, maybe I don't want to be here anyway. Maybe I got better places to be, better people to work with. He grabbed his coat. When you're ready to stop pretending we're legitimate businessmen and admit what we really are, you know where to find me. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the chandelier. Patrick started to stand, but Mick waved him down. Let him go. He needs to cool off. Dad, he's using again, isn't he? Patrick's voice was pained. The way he was talking, the way his eyes looked. Yeah, he's using. We have to help him. Get him into treatment, get him clean. You can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped. Mick sat back down, suddenly exhausted. I'm sorry you two had to see that. Claire reached across the table, took Mick's hand. Her skin was soft, uncalloused, the hand of someone who'd never had to fight for anything. Mr. Brennan, are you okay? You seem like something's wrong. More than just Sean, I mean. I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired. Dad, Patrick's voice had an edge Mick rarely heard. What aren't you telling us? Mick looked at his youngest son, at this boy who'd somehow grown into a man without inheriting any of his father's sins, and felt the weight of the secret press down. 6 months, maybe less. Not enough time to fix everything, but enough time to try. I'm sick, Mick said. Cancer, prostate. The doctors say 2, maybe 3 years with treatment, 6 months without. The words fell into the room like stones into deep water, ripples spreading outward into silence. Claire's hand tightened on his. Patrick's face went through shock, denial, grief, all in the space of a heartbeat. No, Patrick said. No, there has to be something. Clinical trials, experimental treatments, specialists. I'm 56 years old. I've lived longer than most men in my profession. I've got no complaints. How long have you known? Got the confirmation today. I've suspected for a while. Does Sean know? No, and I'm not telling him. Not yet. He's too unstable right now. I tell him I'm dying, he'll see it as permission to take over early, make his move before I'm ready. Patrick stood, paced to the window, stared out at nothing. This is why you want to dismantle everything. You're trying to clean up before you go. I'm trying to give you both a chance at a real life, the kind your mother wanted for you. Sean won't accept it. He'll fight you. He'll fight the transition, fight the changes, probably fight me if I try to take over the legitimate side. Patrick turned back. Dad, what if he's already planning something? What if that's why he's been so angry lately? Mick thought about the photographs, about Sean meeting with Calabrese, about the audio recording he still hadn't listened to. If he is, I'll handle it. How? You just said you've got 6 months. Then I better work fast. The next 3 days moved like a slow-motion car crash. Mick had the thumb drive analyzed by a tech guy he trusted, someone who owed him enough favors to keep his mouth shut. The audio confirmed what the photographs suggested. Sean and Victor Calabrese planning a coup, talking about removing the old man, about splitting Boston territory, about bringing in the drug operations that Mick had always forbidden. The word patricide wasn't used, but it hung between every sentence like smoke. Mick assembled a team to watch Sean without Sean knowing. 4 of his most loyal soldiers, men who'd been with him since the beginning, who remembered what the organization stood for. They reported back with depressing consistency. Sean was meeting with Calabrese twice a week. Sean was consolidating his own power base, talking to younger soldiers, the ones who chafed under Mick's rules about drugs and civilians. Sean was preparing for war. The only question was when he'd pull the trigger. Tommy found Mick in his study late Thursday night, staring at the photographs spread across his desk like tarot cards predicting doom. "You need to sleep, boss." "I'll sleep when I'm dead. 6 months, remember." Mick didn't look up. How many of the younger guys have Sean turned? Maybe 20. Out of 100 total. Not enough to win a war, but enough to cause serious damage if it goes hot. What about the captains? Polly's with you, Frankie's with you, Bobby's nervous but loyal, Sal's getting old, doesn't want to fight. Tommy sat in the chair across from the desk. Mick, you need to make a choice. Either you exile Sean like you did Calabrese, or you bring him in, show him the evidence, give him a chance to back down. And if he doesn't back down? Then you do what you have to do. But you do it before Calabrese makes the first move. Mick gathered up the photographs, slipped them back into the envelope. Set up a meeting, tomorrow night, just me and Sean. No witnesses, no wire, no backup, father and son. That's how you get killed. Or that's how I save my son's life, one or the other. Tommy's face said he thought it was suicide, but he nodded. Where? The old warehouse on Northern Avenue. The one we used for storage before the developers moved in. It's empty, private, neutral ground. I'll make the call. Friday evening came cold and bitter, the kind of November night that promised winter was coming early and hard. Mick drove himself to the warehouse. No backup despite Tommy's protests. No weapon despite every instinct screaming that he was walking into an ambush. If Sean was going to kill him, Mick wanted to give him every chance not to. Wanted to look his son in the eyes and see if there was anything left worth saving. The warehouse loomed dark against the harbor, windows broken, walls tagged with graffiti that declared territory for gangs that had risen and fallen, while this building sat empty. Mick's footsteps echoed on concrete as he walked to the center of the space, to where a single light bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly in the draft from the broken windows. Sean was already there, standing in the shadows at the edge of the light, hands in his jacket pockets. You came alone, Sean said, not quite a question. So did you, I hope. Mick moved into the light. We need to talk. About what? About how you're giving everything we built to Patrick. About how you want to turn us into civilians. Sean stepped forward, and Mick could see the cocaine in his eyes, the pupils too wide, the jaw too tight. Or maybe about how you're dying and didn't even tell me. Mick's blood went cold. How did you know that? I have sources, better sources than you think. Sean circled, keeping the light between them. Prostate cancer, 6 months without treatment, 2 years with, that's what the doctor said, right? Who told you? Does it matter? What matters is you were going to let me find out when. At your funeral. Or were you planning to tell me right before you kicked me out of the family? I was never kicking you out, Sean. I was trying to save you. From what? From being what you made me? Sean's voice rose, echoing off the walls. You raised me in this life. You taught me how to fight, how to earn, how to command respect. You made me into a soldier, and now you want to pretend you're a saint who's too good for the game. I want to give you a chance at something better than I had. I don't want something better. I want what's mine. I want to run this organization, expand it, make it into something that lasts, not dismantle it because you got scared. Sean pulled his hand from his pocket. There was a gun in it. Small revolver, snub-nosed .38, the kind you used up close. I'm sorry, Pop. I really am, but you're in my way. Mick looked at the gun, then at his son's face. Searched for the boy who'd cried when his goldfish died, who'd learned to ride a bike on the same street, who'd hugged Mick so tight the day he came home from Iraq that Mick thought his ribs would crack. That boy was gone. The man holding the gun was a stranger wearing his son's face. You pull that trigger, you're not my son anymore, Mick said quietly. You're just another punk who thinks violence makes you strong. Sean's hand shook. The gun wavered. For a long moment they stood frozen, father and son, separated by 10 feet and 30 years of choices that had led to this warehouse. This moment, this impossible equation where love and loyalty crashed into ambition and drugs and Victor Calabrese whispering poison in the dark. I can't be weak, Sean said, and his voice broke. Not like you, not like Patrick. I have to be strong, have to prove I'm worthy. You were always worthy. From the day you were born, you were worthy. You didn't need to prove anything. Then why does everyone treat me like I'm the problem? Why does Patrick get the clean money and I get the dirty work? Why do you look at me like you're ashamed? I'm not ashamed of you. I'm afraid for you. There's a difference. Sean wiped his eyes with his free hand, the gun still pointed at Mick's chest. Calabrese said you'd say that. Said you'd try to manipulate me, make me feel guilty, turn me against him. Calabrese is using you. The second you kill me, he'll kill you. You're not his partner, Sean. You're his tool. You're lying. I'm dying. I've got no reason to lie. Mick took a step forward. You want to shoot me, go ahead. But do it knowing that Victor Calabrese is laughing at how easy you were to turn. Do it knowing your brother will spend the rest of his life wondering if he could have saved you. Do it knowing your mother would be ashamed. The gun lowered. Sean's whole body shook, the cocaine crash mixing with grief and rage and confusion into something that looked like a breakdown in slow motion. I don't know what to do, he whispered. I don't know how to fix this. You leave Boston. Tonight, I'll give you money, set you up somewhere clean. Phoenix, maybe. Or Austin, somewhere you can start over, get clean, build something that's yours. Mick moved closer, reached out slowly. Give me the gun, Sean, please. For a heartbeat, it looked like it would work. Sean's hand opened, the revolver hanging loose in his grip. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and whatever he saw there turned his face hard again. You have 24 hours to leave Boston, Sean said, raising the gun again. Take Patrick, take your money, take your dying act somewhere else. After that, you're just another old man in my way. Sean. I mean it, Pop. 24 hours. Then I'm coming for what's mine. He backed away into the shadows, disappeared through a door that led to the loading docks. Mick stood alone in the circle of light, listening to his son's footsteps fade into nothing, feeling the weight of failure settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. He'd lost, not the war yet, but the battle that mattered most. His son was gone, swallowed by ambition and addiction and the poisonous promise of men like Victor Calabrese. Mick drove home in silence, his phone buzzing with messages from Tommy wanting to know if he was alive, if the meeting went okay, if Sean had stood down. He ignored them all. When he got to the house in Chestnut Hill, he poured 4 fingers of bourbon and sat in Catherine's chair, the one that still smelled faintly of her perfume even after 10 years. I failed, he said to the empty room. I tried to save him and I failed. The room didn't answer. It never did. At 3 a.m, Tommy called. We got a problem, boss. Sean just left town with 8 guys. They're heading to Providence. I think he's meeting with Calabrese. Let him go. Mick, if they're consolidating, if they're planning something. I know what they're planning. I'm the target. Mick set down his glass. Get everyone to the club tomorrow morning. Everyone we can trust. We need to prepare. For what? For war. Saturday morning came gray and cold, the kind of day that made you want to stay in bed and pretend the world wasn't falling apart outside. Mick was at the social club by 7, Tommy at his side, watching as his captains and soldiers filtered in. 20 men total, out of the 100 who'd worked for the Brennan organization. The rest were either with Sean, neutral, or too scared to pick a side. 20 against however many Sean and Calabrese could muster. Not great odds. Mick laid out the situation with brutal honesty. My son is trying to kill me. He's working with Victor Calabrese to take over Boston. They'll move soon, probably within the week. Anyone who wants to walk away, now's the time. No judgment, no consequences. But if you stay, you're in it to the end. Nobody moved. Okay then. Mick spread a map of the North End on the table. We fortify here. The club is defensible, we've got sightlines on the street, and we've got tunnels that connect to 3 other buildings if we need to evacuate. Tommy's in charge of supplies. Food, water, medical gear, ammunition. Polly, you coordinate with our guys on the street. I want eyes on every approach, every alley, every rooftop. Frankie, you talk to our contacts in the police. I want to know if they're planning to raid us during this mess. Bobby, you get the families somewhere safe. Wives, kids, anyone who could be used as leverage. The men scattered to their assignments. Mick was left alone with Tommy, staring at the map like it held answers instead of just geography. You really think he'll do it? Tommy asked. Attack his own father. I think Sean's too far gone to think clearly, and I think Calabrese has convinced him that I'm the problem. Mick traced the route from Providence to Boston, the highways Sean would use if he was bringing an army. The question isn't if, it's when. The answer came at sunset. Mick was reviewing defensive positions when the front window of the social club exploded inward. Not gunfire. A brick with a note wrapped around it, thrown hard enough to shatter the bulletproof glass. Tommy grabbed the brick, unwrapped the paper, read it aloud. Tonight, midnight, we're coming for what's ours. Last chance to run. Mick checked his watch. 6 hours. He called Patrick immediately. Dad, what's wrong? Take Claire and get out of town. Tonight. Don't pack, don't stop, just go. Drive to New York, check into a hotel under a fake name, stay there until I call. What's happening? Sean's making his move. I need you safe. Please, Patrick, don't argue, just go. A long pause. Then, I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. More than you know. Mick hung up before his voice could break. One son trying to kill him. One son he was trying to save. The math of fatherhood reduced to its cruelest equation. The next 6 hours were organized chaos. Fortifying positions, checking weapons, running through scenarios. Mick had been in combat before in the Gulf when Saddam's army collapsed and everything turned into close-quarters urban warfare. This felt different. Back then the enemy was clear. Foreign soldiers in different uniforms. Easy to shoot, easy to hate. Now the enemy was his son. At 11:45, the street outside went quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that came right before violence. Mick stood at the front window, Tommy beside him, 20 loyal soldiers positioned throughout the building. The tunnels were ready if they needed to evacuate. The police had been paid to stay away for 2 hours. Everything was as prepared as it could be. At 11:58, headlights appeared at the end of Salem Street. 4 cars, SUVs with tinted windows, moving slowly. They stopped 3 buildings down. Doors opened. Men poured out, 24 at least, all armed, all wearing body armor. Sean was in the lead. Even from 100 yards away, Mick could recognize his walk, the way he carried himself, the swagger that came from growing up knowing he was protected. That protection was gone now. "Here we go," Tommy muttered, checking his weapon. The attack came fast and brutal. Sean's crew opened fire on the club, automatic weapons tearing through walls, shattering what was left of the windows, turning the quiet street into a war zone. Mick's men returned fire from their positions, disciplined, controlled, making every shot count. It sounded like the world ending. Mick stayed low, directing his soldiers, watching the street through a crack in the wall. Sean was hanging back, letting his men take the lead, and there at the edge of the fight, Mick saw him. Victor Calabrese, older, grayer, but unmistakable. The man Mick had exiled 15 years ago for breaking the code, for killing civilians, for being everything the Brennan organization tried not to be. And now he was back, using Mick's own son as a weapon. The firefight lasted 20 minutes, felt like hours. When it finally stopped, the street was chaos. 2 of Mick's soldiers dead. Sean's crew scattered, regrouping at the far end of the block. The social club was shot to hell, but still standing. Tommy grabbed Mick's shoulder. "We need to move. They'll regroup and come again." "No, we end this now." Mick stood, ignoring the pain in his leg, ignoring the way his hands shook from adrenaline and sickness. "Get me a white flag." "Mick, no. That's my son out there. I'm not shooting him from behind a wall. Get me a flag." Tommy found a white towel, tied it to a mop handle. Mick took it and walked to the shattered doorway, held it high, stepped into the street. "Sean," his voice echoed off the buildings. "Sean, it's over. No more shooting, just you and me." For a long moment, nothing. Then Sean appeared from behind one of the SUVs, walking slowly toward his father. They met in the middle of Salem Street, surrounded by broken glass and bullet casings, under streetlights that flickered like dying stars. "You should have run," Sean said. "I don't run from my son." "I'm not your son anymore. You said so yourself." Sean's gun was in his hand, but hanging at his side. "Calabrese was right. You're weak, sentimental. The old ways are dead, and you're too scared to admit it." "The old ways kept us alive, kept us human. What Calabrese is offering, that's not strength. That's just being an animal." Mick took a step closer. "It's not too late. Lower the gun, walk away. I'll forget all this. We'll start over." "There is no starting over. There's only forward." Sean raised the gun, and this time there was no hesitation in his eyes. "Goodbye, Pop." The shot came from Mick's right, not from Sean's gun, from the rooftop across the street. Sniper round, perfectly placed, hitting Sean in the shoulder and spinning him around. The gun clattered to the pavement. More gunfire erupted, not from Mick's men, from new positions, new shooters. Federal agents in FBI windbreakers swarming from unmarked vans, surrounding Sean's crew, surrounding Calabrese, shouting orders to drop weapons and get on the ground. In the chaos, a woman appeared at Mick's side. Mid-30s, dark hair, FBI credentials held high. "Michael Brennan, my name is Special Agent Rachel Cohen, your accountant. Or more accurately, DEA Agent Rachel Cohen, who's been undercover in your organization for 3 years." Mick stared at her. "Elena." "Rachel, and this raid isn't for you. It's for Calabrese. We've been building a RICO case for 2 years. Your son just gift-wrapped him for us." Sean was on his knees, bleeding, hands zip-tied, screaming threats and curses at everyone. Calabrese was face down on the pavement, 6 agents holding him there. The war was over before it really began. "Am I under arrest?" Mick asked. "That depends. You willing to testify about Calabrese's operations? His drug trafficking, his weapons smuggling, all of it." Mick looked at his son being loaded into an ambulance. looked at the bodies of his soldiers being covered with sheets, looked at the empire he'd built, burning down around him in real time. "Yeah," he said, "I'll testify." 2 weeks later, Mick sat in a hospital bed in the federal detention center, handcuffed to the rail, watching the news report about the fall of the Calabrese organization. 47 arrests, 200 charges. Victor Calabrese himself facing life in prison. Sean was in the next building over, recovering from surgery, facing conspiracy and attempted murder charges. The public defender said he was looking at 8 years minimum. Patrick visited every day, bringing news from the outside. The legitimate businesses were holding together. The construction contracts were solid. Claire was pregnant, due in 6 months. Mick would be dead before his grandchild was born. But maybe, just maybe, that grandchild would grow up in a world where the Brennan name meant something other than crime, where Patrick could build something clean from the ashes of what Mick had destroyed. It wasn't redemption. Mick knew that. You didn't get redemption for 30 years of breaking the law just because you stopped before you died. But it was something, a start, a chance. And sometimes, that was the best a dying man could hope for. Tommy came to visit on a Tuesday, looking older than Mick had ever seen him. They sat in silence for a while, 2 old soldiers who'd survived one war only to nearly die in another. "Patrick's doing good," Tommy finally said. "He's tough, smarter than both of us combined. He's his mother's son. Sean's asking to see you. The lawyers say it might help his case if there's reconciliation." Mick thought about the warehouse, about the gun pointed at his chest, about 24 hours to leave town. "Tell him I'll think about it." "Mick." "I said I'll think about it." Tommy nodded, stood to leave. At the door he paused. "You did the right thing, testifying, bringing them all down. Catherine would be proud." "Catherine would be alive if I'd made different choices 30 years ago." "Yeah, maybe, but you're making the right choices now. That's got to count for something." After Tommy left, Mick lay back on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. 6 months, the doctor had said. He'd already burned through 2 weeks. Time was running out, running like water through his fingers. But for the first time in 30 years, Michael Brennan felt something that might have been peace. His empire was gone. His son hated him. His body was eating itself from the inside out. But Patrick was safe. Claire was safe. The grandchild he'd never meet would grow up clean. Sometimes peace looked like total destruction. Sometimes redemption cost everything you had. And sometimes, in the end, that was exactly the price you needed to pay. The federal detention center smelled like disinfectant and despair. Mick sat handcuffed to a metal table in an interrogation room, painted the color of old teeth, watching Rachel Cohen arrange folders with the precision of someone who'd spent years building a case. She wasn't Alina the accountant anymore. The soft edges were gone, replaced by the sharp focus of a federal agent who just landed the biggest fish of her career. "Victor Calabrese has been operating in New England for 15 years, Rachel said, sliding the first folder across the table. "Drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, human trafficking. We estimate his organization grosses $400 million annually. Makes your operation look like a lemonade stand." Mick opened the folder. Surveillance photos showed Calabrese's network, a spider web of corrupt officials, dirty cops, and politicians on the take. Compared to this, the Brennan family looked like altar boys. "You've been watching him for how long?" Mick asked. 3 years embedded in your organization, 2 more building the case before that. Rachel pulled out another folder. "But here's the problem. Calabrese insulates himself, uses cutouts, intermediaries, shell companies. We can prove the organization exists. We can't prove he runs it, not yet." "What do you need?" Someone on the inside, someone he trusts, someone who can get close enough to record him giving direct orders. Rachel leaned forward. Your son was supposed to be that person. Sean was our way in. Then he got shot trying to kill you, and now he's in a hospital bed facing attempted murder charges. The words hit Mick like a physical blow. You were using Sean. We were protecting him while building evidence. Every meeting he had with Calabrese, we documented. Every phone call, every text, every payment. We thought if we let it play out, Sean would lead us straight to the top. Rachel's expression softened slightly. We didn't expect him to actually try to shoot you. That wasn't part of any plan. So what now? You arrest me for 30 years of running a criminal organization and hope I flip. We arrest Calabrese for using your son to commit attempted murder. We charge Sean as an accomplice unless he cooperates. And we offer you a deal. She slid a document across the table. Testify about Calabrese's operations. Everything you know. In exchange, we recommend minimal sentencing for you and immunity for Patrick. What about Sean? Sean cooperates. We drop attempted murder to conspiracy. He's looking at 4 to 8 years instead of 25 to life. Rachel paused. But only if you both testify, father and son on the stand, telling the truth about Victor Calabrese. Mick stared at the document, at the legal language that promised to burn down everything he'd built while maybe, possibly saving what was left of his family. 6 months to live. Sean facing decades in prison. Patrick trying to build something clean while his last name dragged him down. No choice at all, really. I want to see my son first, Mick said. Sean, I want to talk to him before I sign anything. Rachel considered this. He's still in the hospital, under guard, but I can arrange a visit. 1 hour, supervised, no physical contact. That's fine. I just need to look him in the eyes. 3 days later, Mick was transported in chains to Mass General Hospital, to a private room on the 6th floor where Sean lay handcuffed to a bed, shoulder wrapped in bandages, face pale from blood loss and morphine. 2 FBI agents stood by the door. Rachel Cohen sat in the corner, recording everything. Sean's eyes tracked Mick as he entered, but he said nothing. The machines monitoring his vitals beeped steadily, indifferent to the wreckage of the relationship playing out in their presence. Mick sat in the plastic chair beside the bed. Up close, Sean looked younger than 32, looked like the kid who'd broken his arm falling out of a tree, who'd cried when his goldfish died, who'd hugged Mick so tight when he came home from Iraq that Mick could barely breathe. They're offering you a deal, Mick said quietly. Testify against Calabrese, get conspiracy instead of attempted murder. 4 to 8 years, eligible for parole. And if I don't? 25 to life, you'll die in prison. Sean laughed, bitter and sharp. Like you're dying of cancer. Funny how we're both on clocks now, Pop. Yours just runs out faster. I deserved that. Mick leaned forward as far as the chains would allow. Sean, I need you to hear something, and I need you to really listen. Victor Calabrese was never your friend. He was never your partner. He used you to get to me, and the second you weren't useful anymore, he would have killed you. You don't know that. I know exactly that because I know Vic. We served together in the Gulf. Same unit, same firefights, same brotherhood. And when we came home, he changed, got hungry, started breaking rules. Killed a civilian family because they witnessed one of his deals. Mick's voice dropped. I exiled him for that. Told him if he ever came back to Boston, I'd kill him. He's been waiting 15 years for me to weaken so he could return. You were just his weapon. Sean turned his head away, staring at the ceiling. He said you'd say that, said you'd try to turn me against him. Then ask yourself this. Where is he now? You got shot protecting his interests. You're facing prison for his benefit. Has he sent a lawyer, posted bail, offered to help in any way? Mick waited. The silence was answer enough. He used you like a bullet, Sean, and when you missed, he threw you away. So what? I'm supposed to betray him, become a rat like you. You're supposed to save your life. You're 32 years old. You do 8 years, you come out at 40. You're still young enough to start over, build something real. You do 25, you come out an old man with nothing. Sean's jaw tightened. The machines beeped faster, tracking the spike in his heart rate. I can't. The code says no cooperation, no testimony, you taught me that. The code was meant to protect us from outsiders, not from predators like Calibres who twist it to their advantage. Mick reached out as far as the chains allowed, stopping just short of his son's hand. I'm dying, Sean. 6 months, maybe less. I don't have time to fix all the mistakes I made raising you, but I have time for this. Please, take the deal. Testify, save yourself. For a long moment, Sean said nothing. Then he looked at Mick, and his eyes were wet. Did you ever actually want me? Or was I just the son who was supposed to take over when you were done? The question broke something in Mick's chest. I wanted you from the moment you were born. Every single day of your life, I wanted you. I just didn't know how to show it without dragging you into this world. And that's on me. That's my failure, not yours. Sean closed his eyes. A tear tracked down his cheek. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking. The FBI agents signaled that time was up. Mick stood, chains rattling, taking one last look at his son in the hospital bed. Sean had already turned away, facing the window, shutting down the way he always did when emotions got too heavy to carry. Mick wanted to say more. Wanted to tell Sean about the nights he'd stayed up worried when Sean was deployed to Iraq, about the pride he'd felt watching him graduate boot camp, about the love that had never quite found the right words. But the agents were already moving him toward the door, and some things, once unsaid, stayed locked in silence forever. Back in the detention center, Rachel had more folders waiting. Your consigliere, Tommy Sullivan, we've been looking at him too. Clean, mostly. Protection rackets, gambling, but nothing that crosses major federal lines. He's old school. Tommy's the best man I know, Mick said flatly. Which is why we want to use him. Rachel opened a new folder showing recent medical records. He's dying. Liver failure, cirrhosis. 6 months, same prognosis as you. And he's volunteered to go undercover into Calibres' organization. Mick felt the world tilt. What? He came to us 2 days ago. Said if we're building a case against Calibres, we need someone on the inside. Someone Calibres would believe had turned on you. Tommy offered himself. That's suicide. Calibres will kill him the second he suspects anything. Tommy knows that. He said, and I quote, we're both dying, might as well die useful. Rachel studied Mick's face. He's doing this with or without your blessing, but it would help if you gave him cover. Make it public that you two had a falling out, that Tommy's looking for new employment. Mick thought about Tommy in the Gulf, Tommy stitching up his leg under fire, Tommy standing beside him for 30 years through every bad decision and worse outcome. Tommy, who'd never married, never had kids, had made the Brennan family his whole life. If he dies undercover, I'm holding you responsible, Mick said. If he dies, we'll both carry it. But if he succeeds, we take down Calibres and save Sean. Isn't that worth the risk? It wasn't. Nothing was worth losing Tommy. But Mick understood the math his friend was doing. 2 dying men, 1 chance to fix the mistakes that had led them here. Sometimes sacrifice was the only currency left. Fine, but I want updates. Daily. And if it starts going sideways, you pull him out immediately. Agreed. Rachel closed the folders. There's one more thing. Your younger son, Patrick, he's been asking questions. Digging into the family finances, trying to understand where all the money came from. We need him to stop. Why? Because if he keeps looking, He's going to discover his investment firm has been laundering Brennan family money for 3 years. We set it up that way. Made sure your legitimate businesses flowed through his accounts so we could track everything. Patrick's completely innocent, but the paper trail makes him look complicit. Rage, pure and hot, flooded through Mick. You used my son, the one son who stayed clean, who built something honest, and you contaminated it. We protected him. The moment this goes to trial, we're granting him immunity, full protection, but only if he stops investigating now before he finds something that forces us to read him in. Rachel's voice hardened. You want to save both your sons? Tell Patrick to stop looking. Tell him to trust you. Can you do that? Mick wanted to flip the table, wanted to put his hands around Rachel's throat, wanted to scream at the injustice of federal agents using his family like chess pieces. But the chains kept him seated, kept him impotent, kept him exactly where corrupt systems wanted men like him. Powerless. I'll talk to him, Mick said through clenched teeth. Patrick visited that evening, bringing news from the outside world. Claire was 12 weeks pregnant now, glowing, already buying baby clothes even though they didn't know the gender. The construction business was holding contracts. The real estate deals were closing on time. Everything looked normal, except for the father in chains and the brother in a hospital bed, and the empire burning down in federal court. Dad, I've been going through the books, Patrick said, sitting across from Mick in the visitation room. There's money flowing through my firm that I can't account for. Transfers from shell companies, investments that don't make sense. What's going on? You need to stop looking. I can't stop looking. If I'm laundering money, even accidentally, I could lose my license. Could go to prison. Claire's pregnant, Dad. I need to know what I'm involved in. Mick chose his words carefully, aware that everything was recorded. You're not involved in anything. The feds set it up to look that way so they could track my operations. Rachel Cohen, my accountant, she's DEA. She's been using your firm as a honeypot. Patrick's face went pale. That's illegal. That's entrapment. That's federal law enforcement. They do what they want and we deal with consequences. Mick leaned forward. Patrick, you're getting full immunity. You're protected, but only if you stop digging. You understand? Stop looking, stop asking questions, and when this goes to trial, you walk away clean. And Sean. Sean's making his own choices. I can't save him if he won't save himself. Patrick's hands gripped the edge of the table. This is insane. My whole life is built on lies. The money, the business, everything. How do I explain this to Claire? You tell her the truth, that your father was a criminal and you didn't know, and now you're fixing it. Mick's voice softened. You're a good man, Patrick. Better than me. Better than this family deserved. Don't let my sins destroy the life you've built. What about your life? You're dying, you're facing prison, and you're still trying to protect everyone else. When do you get to just be selfish? I was selfish for 30 years. Now I'm paying the bill. Mick stood, chains clinking. Go home to Claire, love her, build something clean. And when I'm gone, remember me as the father who tried, not the criminal who failed. Patrick left with his shoulders bent, carrying the weight of knowledge he'd never wanted. Mick watched him go and thought about Catherine, about the promise he'd made at her grave, about how every attempt to keep that promise seemed to make things worse. Tommy's undercover operation launched 3 days later with a performance worthy of an Oscar. He showed up at the detention center drunk, shouting at guards that Mick had betrayed him, that he'd given 30 years to a man who sold him out to the feds, that he was done being loyal to a dying coward. The guards dragged him out. The whole thing was caught on security cameras, leaked to the press within hours. By evening, the story was everywhere. Tommy Sullivan, consigliere to the Brennan crime family, publicly denouncing his boss and looking for new employment. Calabrese bit within 24 hours. Rachel brought Mick the surveillance report. Tommy made contact. Calabrese is interested but cautious. Wants proof of loyalty. He's asking Tommy to handle a problem. What kind of problem? One of Calabrese's soldiers got picked up by Boston PD on an assault charge. The guy's talking about flipping, giving up information to reduce his sentence. Calabrese wants Tommy to convince him to stay quiet. Convince how? Rachel's silence was answer enough. Mick felt sick. You're asking Tommy to commit murder to maintain his cover. We're asking Tommy to convince a criminal to not cooperate with police. How he does that is up to him. If it goes wrong, we'll intervene. And if it goes right, if Tommy has to kill someone to prove himself, then we get Calabrese for conspiracy to commit murder on top of everything else. Rachel's face was stone. This is the game, Brennan. You played it for 30 years. Don't get squeamish now. Tommy handled the problem without killing anyone, though the soldier in question ended up in the hospital with 2 broken legs and a collapsed lung. Enough to send a message. Enough to prove Tommy was serious. Calabrese invited him to Providence for a face-to-face meeting. Mick listened to the wire recordings later, heard his best friend sitting across from his worst enemy, talking like they were old colleagues catching up over drinks. Brennan's finished, Tommy said on the recording. Cancer's eating him alive, and the feds have him by the balls. He's going to testify just to save his kid. No honor left in the man. And you want to jump ship before it sinks. Calabrese's voice was smooth, amused. Smart, but why would I trust you? You've been Mick's lapdog for 3 decades. Because Mick's lapdog is exactly what you need. I know his operations inside and out. I know which cops are dirty, which politicians take money, which judges can be bought. I can hand you Boston wrapped in a bow. A long pause, then Calabrese laughed. You know what I like about you, Tommy? You're honest about being dishonest. Most guys try to pretend they've got principles. You just admit you're a mercenary. We're all mercenaries. Some of us just charge more. The meeting ended with Tommy officially joining Calabrese's organization as an advisor. Within a week, he had access to financial records, distribution networks, and the names of every corrupt official on Calabrese's payroll. The evidence piled up like snow in winter. But the cost was visible too. Mick could hear it in the recordings, could hear Tommy's voice getting rougher, his breathing more labored. The liver failure was accelerating. Stress, alcohol, the physical demands of maintaining the cover, all of it eating away at the time he had left. Pull him out, Mick told Rachel after 2 weeks. You've got enough evidence. Pull him out before he dies undercover. We need one more thing. Direct connection between Calabrese and the trafficking operation. Right now we can prove drugs and weapons. But the human trafficking, the kids being moved across state lines, we need Calabrese on tape ordering it. How much longer? A week, maybe 2. Tommy made it 10 days before everything went wrong. The call came at 2 in the morning. Rachel woke Mick from the thin sleep that was all the detention center allowed, her face grim. Tommy's been made. Someone in Calabrese's crew recognized him from the old days, put it together. They're planning to kill him tonight. Mick was on his feet instantly, chains forgotten. Where is he? Warehouse in Providence. We've got SWAT staging, but it's going to take 30 minutes to get in position. Tommy might not have 30 minutes. Then send me. You're in federal custody. Then release me. Temporary. I can get to Tommy, get him out, buy you time for the raid. Mick grabbed Rachel's arm. He's there because of me. Because I built this organization, because I exiled Calabrese, because I couldn't fix my own son. You want your raid, you want your arrests, fine. But I'm not letting Tommy die for it. Rachel made a call. 3 calls. Federal prosecutor, supervising agent, someone high enough up the chain to authorize temporary release of a federal prisoner. The answer came back in 15 minutes. Denied. I'm sorry, Rachel said. They won't risk it. If you run, if you get killed, the whole case falls apart. Mick sank into his chair, chains pulling tight, and felt more helpless than he'd ever felt in combat, in business, in 30 years of navigating a world where violence was currency and loyalty was the only law that mattered. Tommy was going to die, and Mick couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. Then his cell door opened, and Sean stood there, arm in a sling, face pale but determined. The feds cut me a deal. I testify I get supervised release pending trial. Apparently, saving your consigliere counts as cooperation. He looked at his father. Tommy's been like an uncle to me my whole life. I'm not letting him die either. Rachel appeared behind Sean. You've got 90 minutes before SWAT goes in. You find Tommy, you get him out alive, and you come back. No stops, no detours, no side missions. Understood? Understood, Mick and Sean said in unison. They drove to Providence in a federal vehicle, Sean behind the wheel because Mick's hands were shaking too badly from whatever the cancer was doing to his nervous system. They didn't talk much. 30 years of complicated history, of love and disappointment and betrayal, didn't leave much room for small talk. I'm sorry, Sean finally said as they crossed the state line. For pulling the gun, for choosing Calabrese, for being the son who couldn't just be normal. Normal's overrated, and I'm sorry too. For making you think you had to be someone you're not. For putting this life on your shoulders when you should have been free to choose your own path. Would you do it different, if you could go back? Mick thought about Catherine, about the car bomb, about 30 years of looking over his shoulder. I'd have left this life the day your mother asked me to. Would have worked construction, driven a truck, sold insurance, anything honest. And we'd have been poor and happy and alive. I think we can still get there, after all this. You can. You've got time, I don't. The warehouse was exactly what Mick expected. Old brick building in the industrial district, the kind of place where bad things happened and nobody heard the screams. 2 guards outside, both armed, both looking bored. Calabrese's crew always got sloppy when they thought they were safe. Sean parked 3 blocks away. How do we do this? You stay in the car. Like hell. Sean, you're on supervised release. You get caught in a shootout, you go back to prison immediately. I'm dying anyway. Let me do this. No. Sean pulled a gun from the glove compartment, checked the magazine. Tommy saved my life in Iraq, literally. Pulled me out of a burning Humvee when I was 19 and stupid. I owe him. Mick looked at his son, really looked at him for the first time in years. Saw not the screw-up or the addict or the betrayer, but the Marine who'd served his country, who understood loyalty and sacrifice, who was willing to risk everything for the people he loved. Okay, Mick said, but we do this my way, smart, surgical, in and out. They approached from the rear, using shadows and the cover of rusted equipment. The guards never saw them coming. Sean moved like he'd been trained, like the combat veteran he was, taking down the first guard with a chokehold that put the man to sleep in seconds. Mick handled the second, slower, his body protesting every movement, but muscle memory carrying him through. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of crates and pallets. Voices echoed from the far end. Mick and Sean moved toward them, weapons drawn, covering each other's backs the way they'd been trained in different wars but the same brotherhood. They found Tommy in what used to be an office, tied to a chair, face already showing the evidence of a beating. 3 of Calabrese's soldiers stood around him, one holding pliers, clearly working up to something worse than broken fingers. Victor Calabrese himself stood in the corner, watching with the detached interest of someone observing an experiment. He was older, grayer, but still carried himself like a man who'd never lost a fight. When he saw Mick, he smiled. "Michael Brennan, I was hoping you'd come. Makes this so much more satisfying." "Let him go, Vic. This is between us." "Everything's between us. Has been since you exiled me 15 years ago for doing what was necessary." Calabrese gestured at Tommy. "He was DEA the whole time, wasn't he? Wearing a wire, building a case. And you sent him, just like you sent your son to infiltrate my organization." "Sean made his own choices." "Did he, or did you manipulate him, push him toward me, knowing I'd recruit him, knowing the feds would follow?" Calabrese's smile widened. "You've been playing both sides, Mick. Pretending to run a criminal empire while actually working for the government. That's why you have rules about drugs, about civilians. You're not a criminal. You're a rat in a nice suit. Believe what you want. Let Tommy go." "Or what? You'll shoot me. In front of witnesses. While you're supposed to be in federal custody." Calabrese laughed. "You've got nothing. No leverage, no power, nothing but a dying body and a son who hates you." Sean's gun didn't waver. "I don't hate him, I just didn't understand him. But I'm starting to." The standoff held for a long moment. Then police sirens wailed outside, getting closer. SWAT was early, or maybe right on time. Calabrese's soldiers looked at each other, calculating odds, weighing loyalty against self-preservation. "Run," Calabrese told them. "I'll handle this." They ran. Sean cut Tommy loose while Mick kept his gun on Calabrese, waiting for the trick, the betrayal, the final play. But Vic just stood there, hands in his pockets, smiling like he'd already won. "You know what the funny thing is?" Calabrese said. "I never wanted Boston. I wanted you to suffer. Wanted you to watch everything you built crumble. Wanted you to die knowing you'd failed your sons, failed your wife, failed the code you pretended to live by." He pulled out a phone, showed Mick the screen. A live video feed. Patrick's house. Claire inside, visible through the window, pregnant and unaware. "I've got a man on your youngest boy's family," Calabrese said. "Been there for 3 days. One call from me and she dies. The baby dies. Everything Patrick loves gone." The world narrowed to that screen, to Claire's face, to the knowledge that Mick's attempts to protect his family had instead put them directly in the crosshairs. "So here's the deal," Calabrese continued. "You call off the feds, you recant your testimony, you make this all go away, or I make Patrick's family go away. Your choice." Sean moved before Mick could stop him, crossed the distance in 3 steps, gun raised, finger on the trigger. "You threaten my family, you die." "Shoot me and the call goes out automatically. Dead man's switch. Modern technology, wonderful thing." Calabrese looked at Mick. "Clock's ticking. What's it going to be?" Outside, SWAT was breaching the building. Shouts, boots on concrete, flashbangs going off somewhere in the maze of crates. No time left, no good options. Mick lowered his gun. "Smart man," Calabrese said, but he'd made one mistake. He'd assumed Mick was the only threat. Had forgotten about Tommy, bleeding and broken but still conscious, still moving. Tommy lunged from the chair, crashed into Calabrese, and both men went down. The phone skittered across the floor. Sean grabbed it, smashed it before the call could go out, before the threat could become real. SWAT flooded the room, weapons drawn, shouting orders. Calabrese and Tommy separated, both on the ground, both breathing hard. The soldiers had scattered into the night. The evidence was everywhere, recorded and documented, and enough to bury Calabrese for multiple lifetimes. But as the agents secured the scene, as Mick and Sean were separated and cuffed and read their rights again, as Tommy was loaded into an ambulance with blood streaming from a dozen cuts, Mick saw Calabrese's face. Still smiling. Like this was exactly what he'd wanted all along. The realization hit Mick in the federal vehicle on the way back to Boston. Calabrese had let them win, had staged the confrontation to look like attempted escape, assault on federal officers, threatening witnesses, had given the prosecution everything they needed to put him away forever. Because a man in federal prison was exactly where Victor Calabrese wanted to be. Where he could make deals, trade information, destroy everyone who'd ever crossed him from the safety of a cell where his enemies couldn't reach him. Where he could wait for Mick to die of cancer, for Sean to go to prison, for Patrick's world to collapse when the truth about the money laundering came out. Where he could win by losing, because the long game was the only game that mattered. Rachel met them at the detention center, her face grim with victory that felt hollow. "We got him. Calabrese, 3 of his top lieutenants, enough evidence for RICO charges that will stand up in any court." "He wanted to be caught," Mick said. "Doesn't matter. He's going away." "For how long? With good behavior, with deals, with the way the system works? 5 years? 10? Mick sat heavily, feeling every one of his 56 years. And in that time, how many people will he destroy from inside? "That's not your problem anymore. You did your part. Sean did his part. Tommy's in the hospital but alive. Your family is safe." Rachel pulled out the final paperwork. "Sentencing hearing is in 2 weeks. Federal prosecutor is recommending 5 years for you, eligible for parole in 3. Sean gets 6 years, out in 4 with good behavior. Patrick walks completely clean." 5 years. Mick's doctors had revised his prognosis after the stress of the past weeks. 2, maybe 3 months left, not 6. The math was simple, brutal, final. "What about Tommy?" "Medical release. He's too sick to serve time. He'll die at home, comfortable with whatever care he needs." Rachel's voice softened. "He asked for you, said he has something to tell you." They let Mick visit the hospital one last time, chains and all, to the room where Tommy lay connected to machines that beeped out the countdown to the inevitable. His skin had the yellow tint of liver failure. His breathing was labored, wet. But his eyes were clear when Mick entered. "We got the bastard," Tommy said, his voice paper thin. "We did." Mick sat beside the bed. "You did. You saved Sean, saved the case, saved everything." "Nah, I just bought time. Calabrese is still out there in his head, planning, scheming. Men like him don't stop just because they're behind bars." Tommy coughed, and the machines screamed. When the fit passed, he looked at Mick seriously. "I need you to promise me something." "Anything." "When I'm gone, when you're gone, Patrick takes over. Not the criminal stuff. That dies with us. But the legitimate businesses, the construction, the real estate. Make sure he builds something clean, something Catherine would have been proud of." "I promise." "And tell Sean I forgive him, for everything. He's a good kid who made bad choices. Happens to the best of us." Tommy's hand found Mick's, grip weak but determined. "We had a good run, didn't we?" "The best." "Semper Fi, brother." "Semper Fi." Tommy closed his eyes. The machines kept beeping their rhythm, but Mick knew what he was seeing. Not the hospital room, not the failed body, but something else. Some memory of when they were young and strong and the world seemed conquerable. Mick sat with his friend until visiting hours ended, until the guards came to take him back to his cell, until the only warmth left in the room was the mechanical heat pumped through vents in the ceiling. Tommy Sullivan died 3 days later, surrounded by no one, mourned by few, remembered by even fewer. But to the men who'd known him, who'd fought beside him, who'd shared his loyalty and his sacrifice, he was a giant among soldiers. And when giants fall, they leave voids that nothing can fill. This story is fictional and does not promote criminal activity or violence. All characters and events are products of imagination. Tommy's funeral was held on a gray Tuesday in November, the kind of day that made you believe winter would last forever. They buried him in a veterans' cemetery south of Boston, where rows of white headstones marked the final resting places of men who'd worn the uniform and paid prices most civilians would never understand. The turnout was smaller than it should have been. 20 people, maybe 25, standing in the cold while a Navy chaplain said words about service and sacrifice that felt true but insufficient. Mick attended in chains. 2 federal marshals flanked him, weapons visible beneath their jackets, making sure everyone knew he was a prisoner on temporary release, not a free man paying respects to a fallen friend. Sean stood beside his father, also in chains, also flanked by guards. Patrick stood apart from both of them, holding Claire close, her belly just starting to show beneath the black coat. The chaplain finished. A bugler played taps. The flag that had draped Tommy's coffin was folded with military precision and handed to no one, because Tommy had no family left. No wife, no children, no siblings. Just the men he'd served with in 2 different wars and the organization he'd helped build and ultimately helped destroy. Mick watched the coffin lower into the ground and thought about all the conversations they'd never have, all the stories that died with Tommy, all the wisdom earned through hard years that would never be passed down. Thought about Tommy stitching up his leg under fire in Kuwait, about Tommy standing beside him when Catherine died, about Tommy volunteering for a suicide mission, because 6 months of life wasn't worth living if it meant watching everything burn without fighting back. When soldiers like Tommy fell, they left emptiness that could never be refilled. The world got colder, darker, less forgiving without men who still believed loyalty meant something. After the service, Patrick approached carefully, like he was approaching a wounded animal. "Dad, Claire and I are leaving for New York tonight, setting up the new office, getting ready for the baby. I wanted to say goodbye before sentencing." "You don't have to say goodbye. I'll be here when you get back." "Will you?" Patrick's voice cracked slightly. "The doctors say 2, maybe 3 months. You've already burned through most of October." Mick looked at his youngest son, at this boy who'd somehow become a man without inheriting any of his father's sins, who was about to become a father himself while his own father died in a federal prison. "I'll be here. I promised your mother I'd see you settled, and I keep my promises. Eventually." "Sean's testifying next week. Are you ready for that?" "As ready as I'll ever be." Patrick started to say something else, but the marshals were signaling that time was up. Mick got one last look at his son's face, memorizing the details the way soldiers memorized maps before a mission, knowing the landscape might look different when they returned. If they returned. The sentencing hearing happened in a federal courthouse in downtown Boston, in a wood-paneled courtroom that had seen decades of criminals parade through on their way to prison or freedom. Mick sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame, the cancer eating away not just his time but his substance. His lawyer was a public defender named Marcus Chen, young and earnest and completely outmatched by the federal prosecutors who wanted to make an example of the Brennan organization. Sean sat at a separate table with his own lawyer, looking older than 32, looking like someone who'd aged a decade in the 3 months since he'd pulled a gun on his father in that warehouse. The cocaine was out of his system now, replaced by the hollow clarity of sobriety and regret. Judge Maria Santos presided, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a reputation for being tough but fair. She'd sentenced more mobsters than most judges saw in a career, had heard every sob story and excuse and plea for leniency. She wasn't impressed by tears or promises of reform. She cared about the truth. The prosecution went first, painting a picture of the Brennan organization as a criminal enterprise that had corrupted Boston for 30 years. Protection rackets, illegal gambling, money laundering, violence against civilians. They had charts and graphs, financial records going back decades, testimony from cooperating witnesses who'd flipped when the feds came knocking. They had everything, except the one thing that mattered most to Mick. They had no drugs, no trafficking, no violations of the code that had separated the Brennans from animals like Calibris. When it was the defense's turn, Marcus Chen stood and played his only card. Your Honor, my client is dying. Prostate cancer, stage 4, metastasized throughout his body. The doctors give him 3 months, maybe less. He's cooperated fully with federal investigators, provided testimony that will dismantle the Calibris organization, and asked for nothing except that his sons be shown mercy. Judge Santos looked at Mick over her reading glasses. Mr. Brennan, do you have anything to say before I impose sentence? Mick stood slowly, his leg aching where the old shrapnel lived, his body protesting every movement. Your Honor, I ran a criminal organization for 25 years. I extorted money from honest businessmen. I corrupted police officers and politicians. I profited from human weakness and called it enterprise. I'm guilty of everything the prosecution says I'm guilty of. The courtroom went silent. Even the prosecutors looked surprised at the bare admission. But, Mick continued, I never sold drugs. I never hurt children. I never trafficked human beings like livestock. I tried, in my own broken way, to follow a code that made me less than an animal even if it couldn't make me a good man. He looked at Sean, then at Patrick in the gallery. I failed my family. I failed my wife. I failed the promise I made to leave this life before it destroyed the people I loved. The only thing I ask is that my sons be given the chance I didn't take. Let them build something clean from the ashes of what I built dirty. He sat down. The courtroom stayed quiet. Judge Santos studied her notes for what felt like an hour. Then she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too many broken families parade through her courtroom. Mr. Brennan, I've been a federal judge for 18 years. I've sentenced hundreds of criminals, most of them without remorse, without conscience, without any understanding of the damage they've done to their communities. You're different. Not better, but different. You understand exactly what you've done, and that somehow makes it worse. She paused, letting the words settle. However, your cooperation has been substantial and valuable. You've helped dismantle an organization far worse than your own, and your medical condition is verified and terminal. Therefore, I'm sentencing you to 5 years in federal prison, with immediate placement in a medical facility. Given your prognosis, you'll likely serve your entire sentence. May God have mercy on your soul. 5 years. Mick would be dead in 3 months. The sentence was both everything and nothing, punishment for crimes he'd committed, and absolution he'd never receive. Sean's sentencing came next. The prosecution wanted 8 years for conspiracy, attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon. The defense argued for leniency based on cooperation, PTSD from Iraq, manipulation by Calibris. Judge Santos split the difference. Sean Brennan, you're a decorated combat veteran who came home damaged and sought belonging in all the wrong places. That doesn't excuse pointing a gun at your father. That doesn't excuse working with a man you knew was a predator. 6 years in federal prison, eligible for parole after 4. Use that time to find the man you were before the war broke you. The Marine who served his country deserves that chance. Sean's face showed no emotion, but his hands gripped the table hard enough to make the wood creak. They were processed together, father and son, stripped of civilian clothes and given identical orange jumpsuits, loaded into the same transport van heading to the Federal Medical Center in Devens. The same Fort Devens where Mick had imagined making a last stand in some other version of this story. The prison was newer than the old Army base, built in the 90s when the war on drugs created a demand for more cells. It looked like a hospital on the outside, all brick and glass and landscaping designed to soften the reality of what happened inside. but the razor wire at the perimeter told the truth. This was a cage, just a cleaner one than most. Mick was assigned to the hospice wing, a section of the medical center reserved for inmates who were dying. Cancer, AIDS, liver failure, all the ways the body betrayed itself. The rooms were semi-private, 2 beds each, with windows that looked out at nothing and machines that beeped away the hours. His roommate was an old bank robber named Frank who'd hit 17 banks in the 80s before the FBI caught him. Frank had lung cancer, had maybe a month left, spent his days watching game shows and making bitter jokes about dying in a cage after spending his whole life trying to stay free. "What are you in for?" Frank asked the first night, the standard prison greeting. "Racketeering, you." "Bank robbery. Got greedy, hit one too many, you got family." "2 sons. One's down the hall serving 6 years. The other's on the outside building something clean." Frank coughed, wet and painful. "That's good, the clean part. I got 3 daughters who won't talk to me. Haven't seen them in 20 years. They changed their names so they wouldn't be connected to me. Can't say I blame them." They lay in the darkness, listening to machines beep, listening to other inmates cough and moan and occasionally scream when the pain got too bad. Mick thought about Catherine, about the promise he'd made, about how he was keeping it in the worst possible way. Saving his sons by dying in prison. Sean was in general population on the other side of the facility, locked down 23 hours a day in a cell barely bigger than a closet. Mick saw him during medical appointments, passing in hallways under guard, exchanging glances that said more than words could. They weren't allowed contact, weren't allowed conversation, but they didn't need it. Father and son, both in cages, both serving time for the same organization but different crimes. Patrick visited every Sunday, the only day civilians were allowed in the medical wing. He brought updates on the construction business, on the real estate deals, on Claire's pregnancy. She was showing more now, 20 weeks, glowing with the kind of health that made Mick's dying body seem even more grotesque by comparison. "We found out the gender," Patrick said on a Sunday in January, snow falling outside the barred windows. "It's a girl. We're naming her Maria Catherine, after Mom." Mick felt something break in his chest. "That's good. That's really good." "The doctor says you've got maybe 6 weeks. Is there anything you need? Anything I can do?" "Tell your daughter about me when she's old enough to understand. Don't make me a hero. Don't make me a villain. Just tell her the truth, that I was a man who made bad choices and tried to fix them before I died." "She'll know, I promise." Patrick's hand reached across the table, the only physical contact allowed. "Dad, I'm scared. Of being a father, of screwing it up the way you think you screwed us up." "You won't. You're already better than I ever was. You chose the right woman, you're building the right kind of life. Just love her. Love your daughter. Everything else sorts itself out." The visits got harder as February arrived and the cancer accelerated. Mick's weight dropped below 140, his skin yellowed, his breathing became labored. The doctors increased his morphine, trying to stay ahead of the pain, but the pain was winning. It always won in the end. Frank died on a Tuesday, quietly in his sleep. The guards came and took the body away, and by evening another dying man occupied the bed, this one a former drug dealer with AIDS. The cycle continued. Men came to this wing to die, and die they did, one by one, replaced by the next in line. Mick knew his turn was coming. The summons came on a Wednesday in late February. Federal marshals appeared at his bedside, told him he had a visitor in a secure location. They transported him in a wheelchair, oxygen tank rattling beside him, to a private room deep in the administrative section of the prison. Victor Calabrese sat waiting, also in prison orange, also in chains, but looking far healthier than a man serving life without parole had any right to look. He smiled when Mick was wheeled in. "Michael, you look terrible. You look smug. I'm guessing the appeals are going well." "Appeals are irrelevant. I'll die in here and we both know it. But I wanted to see you one last time before you died. Professional courtesy." The marshals left them alone, doors locked, cameras recording everything. Mick studied his old friend, his old enemy, trying to understand what game was still being played. "You wanted to be caught," Mick said. "In Providence, you set it up so the feds would arrest you." "Of course I did. Prison is the safest place for a man like me. My enemies can't reach me here. My organization runs itself on the outside, and I have all the time in the world to wait for my plans to mature." Calabrese leaned forward. "You thought you won. You testified, brought me down, saved your sons, but you gave me exactly what I wanted." "Which is?" "Time, patience, the long view." Calabrese pulled out a piece of paper, slid it across the table. "That's a list of every federal prosecutor, judge, and FBI agent who worked my case. 12 names. I've got files on all of them. Corruption, affairs, compromising photos. Things that will end careers and destroy lives." Mick looked at the list. Rachel Cohen's name was on it. "I'm going to release those files," Calabrese continued, "one by one over the next 5 years. Slowly, carefully. By the time I'm done, the entire case against me will be tainted. Appeals will be granted. Convictions overturned. And I'll walk out of here a free man while you rot in the ground." "Why tell me this?" "Because I want you to die knowing you failed. You didn't save your sons. You didn't protect your legacy. You just delayed the inevitable." Calabrese's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Sean will serve his time and come out broken. Patrick will spend his life running from your name, and your granddaughter will grow up ashamed of her grandfather. That's your legacy, Michael. Shame and failure." Mick looked at the man he'd once called brother, the man he'd served with in the Gulf, the man who'd saved his life and then become everything he'd fought against. And he felt something that might have been pity. "You're already in your prison, Vic. Has been since the day you decided power mattered more than honor. My prison has bars. Yours is just you, alone with yourself for however long you live. And that's a sentence no appeal will ever overturn." Calabrese's smile faltered, just for a second, just long enough to show the cracks. Then the marshals returned, and the meeting was over, and Mick was wheeled back to his cell where another dying man waited to share stories about regrets and roads not taken. The final weeks passed in a morphine haze. Days blurred into nights, pain became the only constant, the machines beeped their countdown. Mick drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes aware of his surroundings, sometimes lost in memories that felt more real than the present. Catherine, young and beautiful, laughing at something he'd said. Sean and Patrick as children, fighting over toys, making up 5 minutes later. Tommy in the Gulf, stitching up his leg, telling stupid jokes to distract from the pain. The good moments, the ones worth remembering, the ones that made 30 years of bad choices seem almost forgivable. Sean came to see him one last time. The guards allowed it, compassionate exception for a dying man and his son. They sat in the hospice room, the machines providing the only sound, neither man knowing where to start. "I'm sorry," Sean finally said, "for everything, for being weak, for choosing wrong, for pointing that gun at you. I'm sorry, too, for making you think you had to prove something, for dragging you into this life when you should have been free to choose your own. Do you think Mom would forgive us for how we turned out?" Mick thought about Catherine, about her fierce love and fiercer disappointment, about the way she'd looked at him when she realized he'd never really leave the life. "I think she already has. Forgiveness was her gift. She gave it freely even when we didn't deserve it." "What about you? Can you forgive me?" "There's nothing to forgive. You're my son. I love you. That doesn't change based on the choices you made. Mick's hand found Sean's across the bed rail. You've got 4 years minimum in here. Use them. Get clean, stay clean, figure out who Sean Brennan is when he's not trying to be me or trying to rebel against me. Just be yourself. I don't know who that is anymore. Then you've got 4 years to find out. The visit ended. Sean left. Mick never saw him again. Patrick's last visit came on a Saturday in March. Claire was with him, 8 months pregnant now, moving slowly, one hand on her belly. They sat beside Mick's bed while he drifted in and out, aware of their presence but unable to focus, the morphine pulling him down into darkness. "Dad," Patrick said, his voice thick. "The doctors say it's soon. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. I wanted you to know that we're okay. The business is solid. Claire's healthy. The baby's healthy. Everything you wanted for us, we're building it." Mick tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. "And I forgive you," Patrick continued, "for everything. The lies, the money laundering, the life you lived. I understand why you did it. I don't agree, but I understand. And I'm going to make sure Maria Catherine knows her grandfather was complicated, but he loved his family. That's what she'll remember." Claire leaned in close. "Mr. Brennan, I never knew you before all this, but Patrick talks about you all the time. About the good parts. About how you taught him to play chess, about Sunday dinners, about the way you loved his mother. Those stories, those memories, those are what we're keeping. The rest we're leaving here." Mick felt tears on his face, didn't know if they were his or if the morphine was making him hallucinate. But he felt Patrick's hand in his, felt Claire's presence, felt the weight of unborn Maria Catherine in the space between them. Felt, for the first time in 30 years, something that might have been peace. They stayed until visiting hours ended. Patrick kissed his father's forehead. Claire whispered a prayer. And then they were gone, and Mick was alone with the machines and the darkness and the knowledge that he'd done the one thing he'd set out to do. He'd saved his sons. Michael Brennan died at 4 a.m. on March 15th, surrounded by strangers, monitored by machines, buried in a prison cemetery with a simple stone that marked his name and nothing else. No epitaph, no eulogy, no recognition of the empire he'd built or the family he'd tried to save. Just a name and 2 dates, bookending 56 years of choices, both good and terrible. The funeral was private. Patrick and Claire attended, along with a priest who'd never met Mick but said kind words anyway. Sean was not allowed to leave prison, but he sent a letter that Patrick read aloud. "Dad, I'm sorry I wasn't there at the end, but I carry you with me every day, the good parts and the bad. I'm working on being the kind of man Mom would have been proud of. The kind of man you tried to be before the life pulled you under. I've got 3 years left. When I get out, I'm going to help Patrick build something clean, something that honors your memory by being everything you couldn't be. I love you. I'll miss you. Semper Fi." They buried Michael Brennan next to Catherine, in a cemetery in Brookline where trees provided shade and birds sang in different songs. Patrick placed flowers on both graves, Catherine's roses and Mick's lilies, and tried to find words for the grief and relief and complicated love that came with losing a father who'd been both protector and destroyer. "He tried," Patrick finally said to Claire. "That's what I'm going to tell Maria Catherine, that her grandfather tried to be better than he was, and that trying counts for something." "It does," Claire said, her hand on her belly. "It absolutely does." 4 months later, Maria Catherine Brennan was born in a hospital in New York, healthy and screaming and completely unaware of the legacy she'd inherited. Patrick held his daughter and made a silent promise that she would never know the weight of her grandfather's choices, would never feel shame for a name that had once meant power and fear. She would just be Maria Catherine, free, clean, innocent. Everything her grandfather had wanted for his sons, but couldn't give them. 3 years passed with the steady rhythm of healing and rebuilding. Sean Brennan walked out of federal prison on a Tuesday morning in June. His sentence reduced for good behavior and cooperation with ongoing investigations into what was left of the Calabrese organization. He was 35, sober for the first time in a decade, and had no idea how to function in a world that had moved on without him. Patrick met him at the gate in a rental car. No fanfare, no cameras, just two brothers reuniting after years of parallel imprisonment. They drove in silence for the first 20 minutes, both men processing what it meant to be in the same space again, both carrying the weight of everything that had happened. "How's it feel?" Patrick finally asked. "Strange, like I stepped out of 2022 and landed in 2026 without living through the years in between." Sean stared out the window at a Boston he barely recognized. "Everything's different. Or maybe I'm different and the world stayed the same." "You're different, in a good way." "Am I?" Sean's voice carried doubt. "I pointed a gun at our father. I chose a drug dealer over my family. I nearly got everyone killed. How is that good?" "Because you're sober. Because you did your time without complaint. Because you didn't make excuses or blame anyone else." Patrick glanced at his brother. "Dad died believing you could change. Don't prove him wrong." They drove to New York, to the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights that Patrick had bought with the clean money from the construction business. Claire met them at the door, 3-year-old Maria Catherine peeking out from behind her mother's legs, curious about the stranger uncle Patrick had brought home. "This is your Uncle Sean," Patrick said, crouching down to his daughter's level. "He's been away for a while, but he's family. Can you say hello?" Maria Catherine studied Sean with the brutal honesty of a child who hadn't learned to hide what she was thinking. "You look like the picture Daddy has, the one with Grandpa." Sean felt something catch in his throat. "Yeah, which picture is that?" "The one where you're all laughing, before Grandpa got sick." Patrick showed him later, after Claire had taken Maria Catherine to the park. A photo from a Sunday dinner years ago, before everything fell apart. Mick at the head of the table, Sean and Patrick on either side, all of them mid-laugh at some joke nobody remembered. Catherine's piano visible in the background, the chandelier catching light, a moment of pure family joy frozen in time. "I kept it," Patrick said, "to remind myself that we had good days, that it wasn't all violence and betrayal in prison." Sean stared at the photo, at the version of himself who hadn't yet made all the wrong choices. "I don't remember being that happy." "That's the cocaine talking. You were happy. We all were sometimes. Dad made sure of it, even when the world outside was falling apart." Patrick put the photo back on the shelf. "I told Maria Catherine that Grandpa was complicated, that he made bad choices but loved us anyway. She doesn't need to know the details yet. Maybe when she's older." "What will you tell her about me?" "That you're her uncle who made mistakes and fixed them. That you served your country and served your time. That you're starting over and we're helping because that's what family does." Sean felt the weight of those words, the grace in them, the second chance he didn't deserve but was being offered anyway. "I don't know how to do this. The straight life. The 9 to 5. I've been a Marine, a criminal, a prisoner. I don't know how to be just a regular guy." "None of us know what we're doing. We just figure it out as we go." Patrick handed him a folder. "This is a job offer. Site manager for our construction project in Queens. Honest work, honest pay, no connections to anything from before. You'd be supervising crews, managing timelines, making sure everything gets built right." "You're offering me a real job, after everything." "Dad left instructions. He wanted you to have a chance to build something that mattered. So here it is, your chance." Patrick's voice was steady, certain. "You can take it or leave it. But if you take it, you show up on time, you stay sober, and you do the work. No shortcuts, no favors, no special treatment because you're my brother." Sean looked at the folder, at the contract inside, at the salary that was modest but real. at the opportunity to be something other than the screw-up son of a dead mobster. When do I start? Monday, if you want it. I want it. The first weeks were hard. Sean woke up at 4:30 every morning, his body still programmed to prison routines. He'd make coffee in the small apartment Patrick had set him up in, ride the subway to Queens, spend 8 hours managing construction crews who didn't know or care that he'd once pointed guns at people for a living. The work was physical, exhausting, honest. Every nail driven was proof he could build instead of destroy. Every day he stayed sober was evidence that he could choose differently. At night, he'd FaceTime with Patrick and Claire, watch Maria Catherine draw pictures of her family that now included a stick figure labeled Uncle Sean. She'd tell him about preschool, about the puppy she wanted, about how she was going to be a veterinarian when she grew up. Simple, normal, beautiful conversations that felt like oxygen after years of suffocating. 6 months into his release, Sean met with his parole officer for the monthly check-in. The office was gray and bureaucratic, filled with people who'd made worse choices than him and people who'd made better ones. The parole officer, a woman named Rita who'd seen 1,000 stories like his, reviewed his records with practiced efficiency. Clean drug tests across the board, employment verified and stable. No violations, no incidents, no red flags. Rita looked up. How are you doing, really? I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I've got a job I don't hate, a family that hasn't given up on me, and I wake up every morning without wanting to use. That's more than I had 3 years ago. Good, keep it up. Rita stamped some form, filed it away. You're one of the success stories, Sean. Don't screw it up. 2 years after his release, Sean was promoted to senior project manager. He'd proven himself capable, reliable, someone who could be trusted with bigger responsibilities. The crews respected him. The clients liked him. He was improbably good at the straight life. Patrick threw him a small celebration at a restaurant in Manhattan. Just family. Patrick, Claire, Maria Catherine, and Sean. No press, no attention, just 5 people sharing a meal and acknowledging that the impossible had happened. Sean Brennan had made it to the other side. I'm proud of you, Patrick said over dessert, Maria Catherine coloring at the end of the table, unaware of the weight of the moment. Dad would be too. You think, Sean's voice was uncertain, after everything I did. He died believing in you. That's why he testified, why he made the deals, why he spent his last months trying to save both of us. Patrick leaned forward. The greatest thing Dad ever gave us wasn't money or connections. It was the belief that we could be better than him. You're proving him right. 10 years after Mick's death, Patrick stood in a cemetery in Brookline, his daughter beside him, placing flowers on graves that marked his parents' final resting places. Maria Catherine was 13 now, sharp and curious, asking questions about the grandparents she'd never met. Tell me about Grandpa, she said, the same request she made every time they visited. Patrick thought about all the ways he could answer. About the criminal empire and the federal testimony and the prison death. About Tommy and Sean and the war that had destroyed more than it saved. But instead, he told her the truth. Your grandfather was a complicated man who made terrible choices and spent his last months trying to fix them. He ran a criminal organization for 30 years. He hurt people. He broke the law. But he also loved his family so much that he was willing to destroy everything he'd built to give his sons a chance at something better. Was he a good man? He was a man who did bad things and good things. He was human, and in the end, he chose to be better than he'd been, even though it cost him everything. Patrick put his arm around his daughter. The lesson isn't that he was perfect. It's that he tried to change when it mattered. That's what I want you to remember, not the crimes, the effort. Maria Catherine placed her own flowers on the grave. Roses for the grandmother she'd never known. Lilies for the grandfather who died before she was born. "I wish I could have met him," she said quietly. "Me too, honey, me too." They stood in the afternoon sunlight, 3 generations connected by blood and choices, and the stubborn hope that the next generation could be better than the last. Behind them, the city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in its cemeteries and streets. Boston had forgotten Michael Brennan. The North End had new players, new organizations, new empires rising and falling like tides. The social club on Salem Street was now a gelato shop. The warehouse where Sean had pulled a gun on his father was luxury condos. The world moved on. But in the small moments, in the quiet conversations between fathers and daughters, in the flowers placed on graves, in the choices made to be better than yesterday, Michael Brennan's legacy lived on. Not in the empire he'd built, not in the crimes he'd committed, but in the sons he'd saved, and the granddaughter who carried his wife's name, and the simple truth that trying to change mattered more than the failures that came before. Somewhere, in whatever existed beyond the final heartbeat, Michael Brennan rested beside Catherine, his promise finally kept, his debts finally paid, his legacy transformed from crime to redemption through the simple act of letting go. And in Brooklyn Heights, Sean Brennan marked another year of sobriety, worked another honest job managing construction sites, and counted down the days until he could visit his niece again and prove that second chances, when earned through sacrifice and sustained through discipline, could lead to something worth more than all the power his father had ever commanded. The inheritance Michael Brennan left his sons wasn't money or territory or connections. It was the freedom to choose differently. And in the end, that was the only legacy that mattered. I spent 30 years in law enforcement, and I've seen fathers make impossible choices to protect their sons. Michael Brennan's story hit different. A man with 6 months to live, trying to undo 30 years of mistakes while his own son points a gun at him. Here's my question for you. If you had 6 months left, what would you sacrifice to save your children, your reputation, your empire, your life? Drop your thoughts below. And if this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. We've got more stories about flawed men trying to do right before time runs out. What's your take on Mick's choice?